In April of 1998, a driver noticed something on the side of Utah Highway 276 near Maiden Water Spring, Utah, that didn't belong, and stopped to investigate. That's when a deceased female's body was discovered inside a sleeping bag. The female had been shot to death, bound with rope and duct tape, and wrapped in a children's rug and put inside a sleeping bag. The victim was also found to be missing the tips of their fingers and thumbs and was believed to be of Hispanic or Native American descent. Unable to determine her identity, despite exhaustive efforts by authorities, she became known as Maiden Water Victim. At first, it was thought she may have been a victim of serial killer Scott Lee Kimball of Boulder, Colorado, who was responsible for at least 4 murders in rural Colorado and Utah between 2003 to 2004 and is thought to have killed more than 21 people. He is currently serving a 70-year prison sentence and at some point was ruled out as her killer. Not only would her identity go unsolved for the next 20 years, but the identity of her killer would go unsolved for the next 24 years. In 2018, when authorities in Utah released a post-mortem photo of the Jane Doe, an amateur internet sleuther in California suggested that the woman looked strikingly similar to Lena Ozagur Geddes, a missing woman from Youngstown, Ohio. The photos were compared and the similarities were uncanny, even down to the mole on her ear. This hunch prompted authorities to put out new information, and then a sister of Lena's traveled from Mexico to Utah to provide her DNA. This DNA was able to help positively identify the Jane Doe as Lena Reyes Geddes. Lena was 37 when she was killed, and her body was discovered 12 days after her death. Her family took her body home in 2019 to lay her to rest. After her identity was discovered, detectives then tried to determine who her killer was. Focusing on the rope that had been found wrapped around her body, a crime scene specialist in Utah with special tools tested it for evidence. One of those tools was an MVAC, described as a wet-dry type device that is used on especially tough surfaces like rope to extract DNA. The MVAC found 117 enneagrams of DNA on the rope, and a DNA profile can be found from just 1 enneagram of DNA. The result consisted of 2 DNA profiles. At this point, for years after Lena's identity was revealed, swabs were collected by 2 willing family members of her cremated late husband, Edward Geddes. Geddes had initially been a suspect in her murder when he declined to report her missing for 6 months. However, Geddes was found in 2001 in Nevada of an apparent suicide using a gun. A search warrant was required, however, to retrieve DNA from Geddes' son. When the DNA samples came back, it came back to 1 DNA profile, Edward Geddes. But a problem was encountered when the other DNA profile was entered into Cody's. It came back to a 2011 murder in Montana, but the DNA wasn't from a killer. It was actually from the not expert that was used in both cases. The expert then submitted his own DNA, which matched the second sample taken from the rope, leaving only Edward Gage's DNA profile, and in June 2022, it was announced that he was indeed her killer. Lena was a native of a small Mexican town and was an accomplished ballet dancer with a degree in international business. She unfortunately met Gages in New Mexico in 1996, and the couple married months later and moved to Toledo, Ohio. The couple owned a business where they lived in Youngstown, Ohio, and he would take her life just 2 years later. Her family notified the police when they discovered she was missing after she was supposed to take a trip to Dallas and Laredo, Texas to visit, but never arrived. Her husband only reported her missing 6 months after she was last seen, and when interviewed by police, he claimed he dropped her off at the Pittsburgh airport on April 8, 1998, and kissed her just before she walked into the airport. He described a sleeping bag she was going to give a loved one as a gift that he tightly rolled up with rope just before she left on her trip. I have an update to a story I featured a while back. On December 18, 1996, a groundskeeper discovered an unknown woman's deceased body in a cemetery who would become known as the Christmas Tree Lady. She became known as the Christmas Tree Lady because a small 8-inch Christmas tree was found next to her body. She had 2 envelopes in her pocket. One contained a suicide note requesting that an autopsy not be performed, and one contained 2 $50 bills to cover cremation, and the coroner, and both were signed Jane Doe. It was estimated that she was between 50 and 70 years old. After taking steps to hide her identity, she took her own life at the Pleasant Valley Memorial Park in Annandale, Virginia, 25 years ago. It was initially speculated that since she was found in the baby section of the cemetery that she was possibly grieving the loss of a child buried nearby. An autopsy showed that she had downed a bunch of alcohol and Valium and placed a bag on her head, which slowly suffocated her as she was likely unconscious. In 2000, a colored sketch of the woman was produced in hopes that it might be recognized by friends or family, but the sketch did not produce any leads that led to her identity. Recently, Othram performed advanced DNA testing funded by DNAsolve's crowdfund and a substantial donation by an anonymous donor. From there, genetic genealogist Carla Davis discovered a family member of the Jane Doe and a public genealogy website and was able to build a family tree. This person's name was provided to detectives and the relative provided a DNA sample to confirm the match. Turns out the Christmas tree lady was actually Joyce Marilyn Meyer Summers. Joyce was originally from Davenport, Iowa, and was the oldest of 5 siblings. She died at the age of 69, and it's believed that she likely moved to Virginia after the mid-80s. Although she had a scar on her abdomen that resembled a C-section scar, her family doesn't believe that she ever gave birth. Although never reported missing, her family did search for her and even hired a private investigator to help locate her without any success. The few remaining immediate family members, including her sister Annette, are happy to finally have some answers. It's still a sad story, but at least the Christmas tree lady now has her name back. On the afternoon of November 4, 1999, authorities responded to reports of an infant found wrapped in a towel floating near some boathouses on the Mississippi River in Lake Pepin. A boater who hadn't realized what was in the towel said the baby girl fell out when he plucked the bundle from the water. The child still had its umbilical cord attached, and a post-mortem examination wouldn't find any obvious sustained injuries. So while the coroner was unable to establish a cause of death, they did rule the manner of death a homicide. 4 years later, on December 7, 2003, some teenagers stumbled upon another infant that also had its umbilical cord attached. It was a full-term baby boy on the shoreline of Methodist Campus Beach in Frontenac, Minnesota, in the lower boat harbor of the Mississippi River. This baby was found about 20 miles away from where baby Jane Doe was found in the water 4 years earlier. A post-mortem examination revealed the boy was most likely born alive, but a cause of death could not be determined. Just like baby Jane Doe, the manner of death was ruled a homicide. In the same county, on March 26, 2007, a female infant was discovered by Treasure Island Resort and Casino employees. The infant was either indigenous, American, or Hispanic, and it's unclear if it was dead or alive when put in the water, but authorities stated this infant was likely not related to the other 2 infants. These cases became known as babies in the water, and investigators tried for years to solve the cases. They even made an appeal to the community in 2020 for financial donations in an effort to raise $10,000 to fund the cost of DNA comparisons. One couple that contributed to this funding was Jean and Don Matson, who also led their funerals and paid for their burials along with 2 others. In 2021, the Minnesota Crime Lab was able to determine and identify the biological father of the infant found in 1999. In 2022, they were able to identify the mother of the babies born in 1999 and 2003. With the collaboration of rapid DNA, genetic genealogy, and skilled investigators, the mother was identified as Jennifer Lynn Matter of Red Wing, Minnesota. Investigators questioned the 50-year-old woman on April 25, 2022, and she initially denied ever being pregnant in 1999 and 2003. When she refused to volunteer her DNA, authorities issued a warrant for a sample on May 1, 2022. They later returned to her home and asked about her life back in 1999 when Matter claimed she was in a bad mental state and an alcoholic who was in and out of jail and had experienced chaotic life circumstances for a very long time. She then reportedly said that she never even knew she was pregnant, and one day she began bleeding on her way to drop her children ages 2 and 5 off at school and daycare. She went home, gave birth in the bathroom, and then claimed that the baby was born blue and not breathing, so she freaked out. Authorities allege that due to Matter's alcoholism, she couldn't remember if one day had passed before she left in the middle of the night to put the infant in the water before walking away. Matter initially claimed she couldn't recall the 2003 birth of her son, but then spontaneously stated the location where the baby was found. She explained she was almost positive that she began going into labor on a public beach while it was dark and cold outside. She said she never looked to see if the newborn was a boy or girl, but she remembered leaving the baby on the beach before driving away. Matter later admitted that this baby was breathing fine and it may have been crying, but she couldn't remember. Matter was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, one with intent and one without intent. The first infant had been discarded before the Safe Haven Act was put into law in the year 2000, but the second baby was discarded after the act was enabled. The Safe Haven Act allows mothers or a person appointed by the mother to anonymously relinquish their unharmed newborn within 7 days of birth to certain locations. Matter's next court hearing is scheduled for July 20, 2022. With 2 of the 3 newborns now identified, investigators hope to solve the case of the baby Jane Doe discovered in 2007. In 1968, Lucille Hultgren moved from Ohio with her family to the small, quiet city of Galt, California. In 1988, at the age of 79, Lucille was a widower living alone at 504 Poplar Street in Galt. She was known as the super sweet lady who offered lemonade and cookies to the children in the neighborhood. Her husband, Frank, had died the year prior, and she had lived alone in a 1-bedroom home since the fall of 1985 when Frank entered a convalescent home. The couple had 2 adult children, Frank and Henry, and several grandchildren. She regularly attended church, so when she didn't show one Sunday, her friends became very concerned. So on May 23, 1988, 2 of her church friends went by Lucille's house and found the door ajar and entered the home. They were horrified by what they found in her bedroom. Lucille had been tragically sexually assaulted and murdered. The coroner determined that Lucille had died a few days before her body was found. Thankfully, DNA found under her fingernails was able to be collected and preserved. Then 4 years later, in 1992, a transient and registered sex offender by the name of Terry Leroy Bramble was convicted for sexual assault in San Joaquin County. The DNA from the case was collected and preserved. Then in May of 2022, 34 years later, and with the advances in technology, 2 and 2 were put together, and it was found that the DNA from the 1992 sexual assault matched the DNA from the 1988 murder. However, Bramble would not face justice because in 2011, he died at the age of 55 of natural causes under the Highway 99 bridge in Galt where he lived. Lucille's one surviving son, Frank, stated that he wished he could see the killer face justice, and he wished his brother was still alive to see this case solved. Ricky Kevin Lubert was born March 4, 1965 to parents Emil and June Lubert. At the age of 42, Ricky lived on Highway H in Texas County, Missouri, about a mile from the town of Tyrone, and was the father of 2 sons that he dearly loved. He was also a member of the Tyrone Volunteer Fire Department. In November of 2007, when Ricky failed to show up for a work project, his neighbor went to check on him and would shockingly find Ricky's deceased body. It was determined that he had been shot to death about 3 days earlier. There were multiple bullet holes in the front window of his mobile home, and authorities believe the suspect shot into the trailer from the highway. During the investigation into the murder, Tommy Wetzel became a person of interest and would remain a person of interest for a long time. But without hard evidence that would hold up at trial, no arrests could be made. During the investigation of Wetzel, he was charged and convicted of a federal weapons violation, but he wasn't charged at the time in connection with the murder itself. In January 2022, the Texas County Sheriff's Office reopened the case with the help of Steve Spangler and Kelly Siegler from the Cold Justice television program. With the extra resources, new interviews, and a fresh look into the original case files and evidence, it would lead to the indictment of 63-year-old Tommy Wetzel, who was charged with first-degree murder. On June 29, 2022, nearly 15 years after the murder, Wetzel was arrested at his home in Liberal, Missouri, and brought to Texas County to be held without bond. It's not publicly known at this time how the 2 men were acquainted and the reason for the murder. Susan Marie Nagersmith was born December 30, 1969 to parents Marilyn and Kent Nagersmith of Carmel, New York. A cheerleader and competitive skier, she was known for her friendly and outgoing personality and as someone with lots of friends who enjoyed having fun. In 1990, At the age of 20, she had just finished her sophomore year at Westchester Community College, where she was majoring in marketing and made plans to go with 5 close friends to celebrate Memorial Day weekend in the shore town of Wildwood, New Jersey. The girls arrived in Wildwood around 1:30 a.m. on Saturday and rented a room at the Sonata Motel. They had some alcohol and marijuana, and Susan decided to leave the room about 9 p.m. and venture out by herself to see if anything exciting was going on in the area. Since Susan was only 20, she couldn't legally drink at any of the bars that line the streets of Wildwood. Those streets were filled with thousands of young adults who had come to the shore for the holiday weekend, and there were dozens of house parties in the area as well. With many of them spilling over into the streets, it didn't take long for Susan to find one that looked inviting, and she began partying with strangers. At some point during the evening, Susan ended up at a party at the JoJo Apartments on Maple Avenue, about 5 blocks away from the motel where she was staying. By the time she got there, she had already consumed a lot of alcohol and was clearly intoxicated. She was seen throwing up at least once, and witnesses recalled that she was having trouble standing. She was offered a ride back to her motel by at least one person who was concerned about her, but she declined. The next morning, May 27, 1990, her partially clothed body was found near dumpsters behind Schellingers, a restaurant located just 2 blocks from one of the busiest sections of the boardwalk where she was seen hours earlier. There was a bloody handprint on her chest and blood on her t-shirt, which along with her bra was pushed up around her neck. There was also blood found on other parts of her body, and she reportedly had a skull fracture. Her jeans were pulled down and twisted around her left ankle, and her tennis shoes were missing and her feet were clean, showing she hadn't walked without her shoes on. A witness would eventually come forward with information. This witness was a 20-year-old man who was visiting the shore from Philadelphia that had left the apartments around 2 a.m. with her. He later told police that he had attempted to escort her back to her hotel, but she was so drunk that she couldn't recall the name of her hotel or where it was located. The man, who admitted that he had been drinking heavily as well, stated that he eventually gave up on Susan and went back to his own room. It was about 2:30 a.m. when he last saw her leaning against the wall of Schellingers restaurant on Atlantic Avenue at the time. He said she was so intoxicated that she would have been incapable of consenting to sex. A toxicology report showed her blood alcohol content was 0.285. While this witness was one of the last people to see her alive, he was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. Detectives eventually managed to locate and interview a total of 107 people who had seen or spoken to Susan on the night in question. They administered polygraph examinations to 17 people, but all of them were eventually cleared of any involvement in Susan's death. Initially, her death was covered up and classified as accidental due to alcohol intoxication and exposure. It's said that it was ruled accidental because the town wanted to protect terrorism, and it's also said that the medical examiner, Dr. John Napoleon, was incompetent and unqualified for the job. They told the public that she was drunk and she had consensual sex behind the restaurant, and afterwards she was too drunk to get up, and she froze to death in 57-degree weather. Dr. Napoleon's conclusion was that Susan's cause of death was lethal cardiac arrhythmia and hypothermia due to alcoholic intoxication and exposure. However, he explained away all the bruises on her body by claiming she had likely injured herself by falling down due to her level of intoxication. This lit a fire under her angry parents and local residents as well. Police could no longer conduct a homicide investigation despite the fact that many of them believed Susan had been murdered. A Seattle City resident named Terry Downey joined Susan's parents to attest to accidental ruling. She's also made a name for herself in Cape May County by questioning investigations into the deaths of several other women that occurred in recent years. Susan's parents hired attorneys and private investigators and fought a legal battle. Susan's father, Mr. Negersmith, also sought a second and third opinion from forensic pathologists who both reached the same conclusion. Susan was a homicide victim. The fight for justice had continued for 3 long years when a new prosecutor, Steve Moore, became the new Cape May County District Attorney. After reading the Negersmith's file, Moore reached the same conclusion as Susan's family. He lobbied state law enforcement officials, and an extensive review by the state police led them to the same finding: homicide. After a 3-year battle, her cause of death was changed to homicide after a world-renowned forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, viewed autopsy photos and listed 26 points of trauma on Susan's body. But still, the original medical examiner refused to change her death certificate. It wasn't until 1995 when a new coroner, Dr. Elliot Gross, was appointed coroner and agreed to take another look at Susan's death. Dr. Gross examined Susan's larynx, which had been preserved, and found that it had fractures consistent with manual strangulation. In October 1995, the cause of death on Susan's death certificate was finally changed to homicide. An autopsy determined that she was sexually assaulted before her death and DNA from the assault was preserved. A profile was later created from the DNA, and in 2018, the Major Crimes Unit started a genetic genealogy analysis of the unknown DNA profile. Using genetic genealogy, genealogists and investigators were able to narrow it down to 62-year-old Jerry Rosado. Rosado then provided a buccal swab on May 26, 2021, exactly 31 years after the attack, to officially verify the match. He was later arrested 32 years after the murder, but has only been charged with second-degree crime of sexual assault. No murder charges have been filed in the case, but authorities say further charges could be made should additional information become available. He now faces 5 to 10 years if convicted of the sexual assault. 22-year-old Christine McWhorter and her aunt 31-year-old Beatrice Daniels were originally from the Philadelphia area of Pennsylvania and moved to Mount Union, Pennsylvania to get away from the city violence. The women lived in the Chestnut Terrace housing complex with Christine's 4-month-old daughter and 4-year-old son in Mount Union. Neighbors would report that on January 3, 2009, they heard yelling and commotion in the early morning hours. Later that same morning, Christine's 4-year-old son was able to finally get a neighbor's attention. That's when it was discovered that both women were found lying in their bed, shot to death. It's unknown how long the children were left alone with the bodies, but it's believed the murders occurred sometime between 9 p.m. on January 2nd and noon on January 3rd, which is when the 4-year-old got the attention of a neighbor. Droplets of blood were taken into evidence from the scene, and the initial DNA report concluded that the blood collected from the stairs and interior doors of the apartment were all deposited by an unidentified male. 7 years later, on March 14, 2016, Trooper David Clemens submitted DNA samples to DNA Solutions, which in turn prepared and forwarded the samples to Parabon Nanolabs. Parabon performed phenotyping on a blood sample which narrowed the suspect down to a medium to light-skinned African-American male with green or hazel eyes and little to no freckles. On July 12, 2018, Parabon conducted a genetic genealogy analysis of the DNA recovered from the murder scene. 3 months later, they provided a report on the genetic genealogy of the DNA and identified Mariko Tyrone Johnson as a potential match. Johnson was interviewed over a year later at his home in Newport News, Virginia. He told investigators that he knew Christine through his then-girlfriend, Cynthia Swan, whom he dated from 2001 until 2012. The women were close friends, but Johnson denied having ever entered Christine's apartment. He provided his DNA to detectives, which was sent off to the state police lab in December 2019. The lab reported Johnson's DNA matched the blood evidence found on the stairs and interior doors of the crime scene. Investigators then compared Johnson's time card to the estimated time of the double murder. The complaint says that on January 22, 2020, state police received time cards from Johnson's then-employer, the New York Department of Corrections, which confirmed he was off of work on January 2, 2009, and started his January 3rd shift at 7 a.m. Police estimate the time it takes to travel the 294 miles between Mount Union and Johnson's thin workplace is 4 hours and 43 minutes. Police checked to see if Johnson had access to a .25 caliber firearm, the type used to kill Christine and Beatrice. His half-brother told troopers that he thought his late father owned a .25 caliber handgun and that Johnson inherited their father's belongings when he passed away in 1998. Johnson was then arrested on May 24, 2022 and charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide 13 years after the double murder. Investigators interviewed Johnson's ex-girlfriend, Cynthia, and learned that she was originally supposed to travel with Christine from Philadelphia to Mount Union on January 1, 2009 and stay for the weekend, but decided at the last minute to remain in Philadelphia with a man, Benjamin June. Cynthia told the troopers it was around this time that Johnson found out that Cynthia was having an affair with June. Police say the last incoming text on Christine's cell phone was from Cynthia, asking Christine to call her, and it was important, but she never responded to the text. Johnson remains behind bars with an upcoming trial, but has spent the last 13 years enjoying his freedom. Kara Nancy Nichols was born on May 20, 1993 to parents Julia and Paul Nichols. She grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, with an older brother and a younger sister. During her sophomore year of high school, Kara fell into depression when her family dog died. Her parents tried to get her to go to counseling, but Kara refused and didn't take her prescribed medication. Instead, Kara started using drugs and became rebellious and manic, and was most likely struggling with an untreated mental illness. She attended Rampart High School in Colorado Springs and later graduated from local alternative high school Life Skills of Colorado Springs, where she could work at her own pace. After graduation, Kara began waitressing and modeling part-time, mostly lingerie shoes. She also created a profile on Model Mayhem, an online modeling website that links models with photographers. In the summer of 2012, Kara quit her job and moved with her family to Chicago, Illinois. Her drug abuse worsened and her family enrolled her in a drug treatment program, but she was discharged early when she didn't follow the rules. In August of 2012, Kara moved back to Colorado Springs on her own. She lived in a home with 3 male roommates in the 6700 block of Mission Road in the Cimarron Hills area of Colorado Springs. A couple months later, on October 9, 2012, she told her roommate that she would be traveling from Colorado Springs to Denver for a photo shoot job. When she left, she was picked up by someone in a dark sedan. Her brother Terrence last spoke to her at almost midnight that night, and she said she was on her way to Denver for a modeling assignment. 2 days later, Kara's parents reported her missing when she didn't return. On November 30, 2012, a profile featuring photos of Kara appeared on My Red Book, which is an online Las Vegas escort website. When police called the number, her family said the voice was not hers. Authorities eventually concluded that the photos were taken from another source and that Kara was not in Las Vegas. And escort websites often use random pictures lifted from the internet to advertise online. Months later, police learned she had actually been working as an escort and had placed an ad wearing lingerie on a classified ad website at 7:28 p.m. the night she disappeared. Kara's cell phone records revealed she made 8 calls on October 9, 2012 between 9:58 p.m. and 11:08 p.m. and that she last used her phone at 11:59 p.m. On May 8, 2013, the detective finally received a return call from a man who identified himself as Joel Hollendorfer. When asked if the phone belonged to Hollendorfer, he said yes. The detective said he was investigating a missing person case and his number was on the list of records from the night she disappeared. Hollendorfer said he was seeking escort services that night and answered Kara's ad, saying they spoke several times that night, but he was looking to go to her, but she only went to locations. Hollendorfer went on to say that they never met that night. Investigations volunteer Mark Oldfield was able to track Kara's phone movements the night of October 9th to its last known usage in the early hours of October 10th, 2012. Mark was able to determine that Kara left her house at approximately 11:16 p.m. and traveled the route that led directly toward Burgess Road, where Hollendorfer's family owned a farm. Further details revealed 6 calls and texts were sent and received from 11:34 p.m. to 11:41 p.m. coming off Woodsman Tower. Based on Kara's phone activity, her phone was at the intersection of Woodman and Black Forest Road at 11:33 p.m. Based on the last known activity from Kira's phone, it led them to 9665 Burgess Road. Detective Gigliotta obtained a search warrant for the address on October 2, 2014, a year after she went missing. Multiple agencies participated in the search, including cadaver dogs. Hollendorfer's mother, Betty, walked the property with members from the search team and pointed out numerous locations where animals may be buried since purchasing the property in 1985. Cadaver dogs were brought to the property and ground-penetrating radar was used to determine spots that had been disturbed. But instead of excavating the spots, they did what Betty suggested. They searched the property across the street at 11,660 Greenacres Lane, which her son also had access to. Cadaver dogs narrowed in on a shallow grave which was excavated, and it was apparent that roots were dug up at the site and a hole had been dug to about the size of a human body, but no human remains were found. For reasons that are not explained in the affidavit, none of the other areas the dogs hid on were excavated, leading to the question, why bring cadaver dogs to a property and not dig when they hid on certain areas? Turns out, Betty was protecting her son, and if they would have excavated the areas across the street that the dogs hid on, they would have found what they were looking for. During an interview that same month, Hollendorfer admitted to looking up Kara online, wanting to meet her and communicating with her. He said Kara never met him at the location that she was supposed to, and he never ended up meeting her. He added that he had been heavily involved with escorts and drugs, which he says is why his marriage ended. During the initial investigation, Detective Giulietta attempted to reach Hollendorfer's wife Christina, but she wouldn't cooperate with the initial investigation and never made a statement. However, on February 1, 2022, 10 years after Kara's disappearance, FBI special agents interviewed Christina. Turns out, she had been keeping a huge secret for 8 years, until investigators tracked her down to Virginia and knocked on her door. Now known as Christina Palmer, she stated that after Hollendorfer's father died in November 2014, he admitted to her that he accidentally killed an escort he hired and buried her body on top of an old horse grave on his parents during the interview. Christina stated that Hollendorfer said that he accidentally strangled Kara to death and then buried her on an old horse grave with plastic bags and lime. She also told detectives that Hollendorfer said he told his parents what he did and that he believed it had driven his father to his grave. Based on the information she provided, on February 7, 2022, a search warrant was obtained and a team of El Paso County Sheriff's Office detectives and specialists, alongside the FBI Evidence Response Team, were deployed to the 9600 block of Burgess Road. Police zeroed in on a spot where his mother said her favorite horse Milo was buried. 3 feet down, they found a garbage bag, a human hand, and more remains. Hollendorfer was then arrested days later on charges of second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence, ending a 10-year mystery that could have ended 9 years earlier. During a court appearance on February 17, 2022, Hollendorfer's charge was upgraded from second to first-degree murder, and his bond was revoked based on the autopsy results. Kara's family has long maintained that the El Paso County Sheriff's Department botched the initial investigation, and the sheriff, Terry McKetta, was run out of office amid allegations of misconduct in 2014. Some describe McKetta's term in Colorado Springs as similar to living in the Wild West. Many described former Sheriff McKetta as very corrupt. He allegedly led an incredibly corrupt department and was involved with multiple women in the department, giving them lavish raises and spending department funds on romantic vacations with them. He would also allegedly punish or fire the women who wouldn't sleep with him. He also allegedly had a hit list of people he intended to kill. At the same time, one officer was running an extensive Ponzi scheme in the department. David Hawkins had collected around $300,000 in cash from fellow deputies and even their families, but never invested it and was eventually convicted and sent to prison. The allegations against McKetta were already years old at that point, but he couldn't be forced to resign because of some technicality. McKetta also mismanaged the investigation into the devastating Black Forest fire. In the summer of 2021, less than a year before Kara's body was discovered, several local area residents became concerned about the condition of 2 horses on the Hollendorfer's property, Meadowview Farm. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office investigated and had a veterinarian and a horse rescue come to the site. Unfortunately, both horses had to be euthanized because they were so starved they could not be saved. It's unclear what, if any, charges were filed against the Hollendorfers. I'm sure they were likely more concerned about law enforcement being so close to Kara's grave at the time. Her parents were in disbelief 2 years after their daughter went missing over a recording released by the El Paso County Sheriff's Office that suggests the initial investigator brushed off the case. In the 50-minute recording, Patrol Deputy Cliff Porter is confronted by his superiors about statements he made in Kara's case. Porter was taken off the case after a couple of months, but he came under fire after statements he made to his replacement were reported to his superiors. He repeated those statements in a meeting as well. This is what he said. I said, maybe somebody would finally just say, look, this is a cold case. This girl is probably dead. We're gonna work the leads, but we're gonna shelve this thing. We won't overreact every time Mr. Nichols comes in. Kira's mother stated that in the first few weeks, they were wondering why Officer Porter wouldn't respond to their calls. And when he did, he seemed very cynical, very negative about the possibility of finding their daughter alive. She stated, "You just wonder what else has gone on. You wonder how many other victims have been treated like this. It just re-victimized a family who's already suffering." 34-year-old Rita Gutierrez Garcia was born April 7, 1983, and was described as an attentive and compassionate mother of her 3 boys. On March 17, 2018, she went out with friends to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. After spending time at the Speakeasy and Breakers Grill on Main Street in Longmont, Colorado, she and friends went through the alleyway to the parking lot behind Three's Bar to leave. Rita was on the phone with someone at 2:30 a.m. when she told her friends she was getting a ride with someone else, and so they left. Sadly, this is the last time they would see her alive. Later, her mom arrived at Rita's home on Sunday to take her 18, 13, and 9-year-old grandsons to church. That's when the grandmother learned her daughter was missing, and after an exhaustive search for her, they reported her missing the following day. Early on in the investigation, Juan Figueroa was identified as a possible suspect in her disappearance. Several witnesses also reported that he had interacted with Rita inside the bar about 1:30 a.m. and was seen outside of the bar near her about an hour later. A security camera captured Figueroa's truck traveling through that exact same area at 3:03 a.m. Cell phone data from Rita's phone placed her phone near the 600 block between Main Street and Kaufman Street between 2:40 a.m. to 03:03 a.m. on the morning she was last seen. 4 minutes later, 2 911 call hang-ups were made from Rita's phone. Her phone dropped off the network at 3:10 a.m. and was in the area of 3rd Avenue and Vivian Street in Longmont at that time. Rita was missing, and evidence pointed to one person responsible for her disappearance. That was Figueroa. Figueroa left Colorado 2 days after Rita went missing after police attempted to contact him at his mother's home in regards to her disappearance. He was briefly in Texas, but later crossed the border into Mexico. While in Mexico, he asked several people for money and said he was in trouble and that he planned to sell his truck. He tried to re-enter the U.S. and was arrested on March 27, 2018 on a warrant for a separate sexual assault and attempted murder of a woman a year earlier, for which he was later convicted and sentenced to 93 years to life. While behind bars, he told a cellmate that he strangled the missing woman and disposed of her body before returning to his sister's house. He also told that cellmate, according to the indictment, that she had called him a weirdo, which caused him to punch her, knocking her unconscious. After that, he strangled her to death. Prosecutors presented their case to a grand jury in April 2021 as a no-body homicide, as DNA evidence and cell phone data linked him to her presumed murder. 2 months later, the grand jury indicted him for first-degree murder and kidnapping in Rita's case. In court, he admitted to knocking her unconscious, dragging her to his vehicle, and strangling her. He said he believed he was insane that night and snapped when she called him a weirdo. As part of a plea deal, Figueroa led investigators to the location of Rita's body. She was recovered in an area of northern Colorado's Weld County on April 28, 2022. Figueroa pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. He was immediately sentenced to 48 years in prison. The sentences will be served concurrently along with the 93-year sentence he's already serving for the unrelated case of kidnapping and attempted murder of another victim. Clifford Bernhard served his country as an Army sergeant in the Vietnam War and was ultimately awarded a Purple Heart. After serving in the Army, he began working as a construction worker. On June 7, 1969, he would marry his high school sweetheart, Linda Reich. The couple was very much in love and very well liked by all that knew them. On November 6, 1973, the 24-year-olds were still settling into their new ranch-style home at 1116 Dorothy Lane near the Yellowstone River in Billings, Montana. They had planned to go have dinner at Linda's parents' house around the corner, but they decided to cancel. Linda called her mother June Reich and told her they planned on staying in for the night instead. The two enjoyed a hamburger casserole that Linda had whipped up for them. The next morning, when Linda didn't show up for work, Her mother went to check on the couple and came upon a horrifying scene. She found the couple tragically and brutally murdered. Cliff was found lying face down in the master bedroom with a severe wound to his head. Cliff and Linda had both been strangled to death, and Linda had been sexually assaulted and left naked on the floor of another bedroom. There were also signs that both were bound at the wrist and ankles at some point. Strangely, and possibly from the shock of it all, while waiting for law enforcement to arrive, Linda's mother cleaned up the dishes which disturbed the crime scene. She stated that it appeared to her that before doing the dishes that the table may have been set for 3 people. The killer had opened up windows in both bedrooms the bodies were found in and turned the furnace down all the way. The lowest temperature that night was 6 degrees, making it cold enough for a bowl of ice cubes found next to Linda's body to remain frozen. It's unknown what the bowl of ice next to her body was for, but possibly used during the sexual assault. Missing from the house was all of Linda's panties, some of her shoes, and her green suitcase. With no signs of forced entry, investigators speculated that they knew their killer and had willingly let them in. Also, the murder may have been premeditated as he brought his own leather bindings. The crime devastated the Bernhard and Reich families, and left a void in the lives of all who knew Linda and Clifford. Over many years, about 80 DNA samples were collected from persons of interest, but none were a match. In 2004, there was a huge break in the case when DNA was discovered on Linda's purple pants. It was entered into Cody's, but there was no matches. Then in 2012, a cold case unit became obsessed with finding the killer in the following year. An anonymous donor offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to a conviction. In 2015, the county hired Parabon to analyze the DNA and created a composite predicting the suspect's ethnicity, hair, and eye color and complexion. A few years later, in 2018, when forensic genetic genealogy was fully blossoming, genealogists were working tirelessly to pinpoint who the DNA belonged to. Finally, on January 3, 2019, Parabon determined the suspect was one of 2 brothers. Unfortunately, one of those brothers had died, and so investigators obtained DNA from the one living and were able to rule him out, which means the DNA could only belong to one individual. 45 years after Linda and Cliff's deaths, authorities announced the suspect, Cecil Stan Caldwell, a former co-worker of Linda's at a grocery store warehouse. Linda worked in billing and secretarial work while Caldwell worked in the warehouse and meat department. He was also a father of 2 adopted children and 2 stepchildren and had no criminal history. Unfortunately, in 2003, he died in Billings at the age of 59 and never faced justice. Caldwell had no arrest record, and authorities likely will never know the true motive for the slayings. Former Deputy Dean Mellum, who worked on the case in 1973, said he hopes the news will at least give some comfort to the couple's families. Kim Everett Kirk was born January 12, 1970, and was one of 3 daughters. She met David Neil Cox through a friend at work around the year 2000, and initially he was a nice guy. They quickly married, and he became a stepfather to Kim's 2 daughters, and the couple went on to have 2 sons together. Cox was a truck driver, but following a back injury and a prescription for painkillers, he left the workforce and qualified for disability. He then became addicted to meth and started abusing Kim. Due to the drugs, his behavior and personality had suddenly changed. At some point, Cox had even gone as far as manufacturing his own meth. In 2009, when her daughter Lindsay confessed to her mother that Cox had been sexually assaulting her for a few years, Kim finally decided to divorce him. But this instilled fear into Kim, and she made plans for her and the kids to take refuge at a women's shelter out of fear that Cox would retaliate. Kim took the children and left and pressed charges against Cox, and when deputies arrived to the home, Cox was arrested for statutory rape, sexual battery, and child abuse. They also found the precursors to make meth. Kim, still deathly afraid of her estranged husband, moved her and the children in with her sister, Christy Simon. While in the county jail, he told other prisoners that if he ever got out, he would kill his wife. However, unable to raise bond money, he remained in jail for 9 months. During that time, he often made threatening phone calls and would tell her he was coming for her. Suddenly, in April 2010, his bond was significantly reduced, allowing him to raise enough funds to get out. The family only learned he had been released when a friend saw him on the street and called Kim. She then went to the Chancery Court and got protective orders against him in Lee, Pontotoc, and Union counties. Now that he was out, he would sometimes drive by her home and point his finger at her and simulate a gun. Then about 7 p.m. on May 14, 2010, tragedy would strike. 12-year-old Lindsay was sitting on the couch while her mom's sister, Christy, was cooking dinner and one of her brothers was playing basketball outside. Her mother, Kim, was in the back of the house preparing a bath for her youngest son. That's when Cox shot through the screen door of the home in Sherman, Mississippi, before barging inside and ordering Lindsay not to move. He then chased her aunt out of the house. He then found Kim and shot her twice. Her youngest son would frantically run to a closet. Meanwhile, Aunt Christy called Kim's parents and told them what was happening. Cox called her parents and told them it was all their fault he was arrested and he had planned to kill all of them. Kim's father and stepmother, Benny and Melody Kirk, then had to serve as negotiators on the phone with Cox. They could hear Cox taunting Kim as she was dying and belittling her and said he wanted to sit there and watch her suffer. Kim was able to talk on the phone briefly to her father while she lay on the floor bleeding to death and said, "Daddy, I'm dying." She was still hanging on to life at midnight. He had barricaded the four of them inside the home and physically and mentally tortured the family and told law enforcement he planned to kill the children and then himself. When he stopped talking to law enforcement at 3:23 a.m., officers stormed the house and arrested him. Kim was sadly already deceased during those nearly 9 hours of holding the children hostage. Cox sexually assaulted his stepdaughter, Lindsay, 3 times in front of her dying mother, even as police surrounded the home. 2 years later, he pleaded guilty to capital murder, kidnapping, and several other felonies related to the standoff and was sentenced to death. He then began years of appealing his conviction and sentence. He then made plans to waive his appeals and proceed with the execution, which infuriated Lindsay as she wanted him to sit in prison and reflect on what he did to her and her family. Lindsay has allowed her name to be made public to tell her story. On November 17, 2021, 50-year-old Cox died by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and Lindsay, now 23, was there to witness it. He became the first Mississippi inmate to be put to death in 9 years. In the days prior to his scheduled execution, Cox made a shocking confession. He said that he had been the one that killed his sister-in-law, Felicia Cox, who was married to his brother. On November 19th, 2 days after his execution, his attorneys hand-delivered a letter in which Cox confessed to the murder and gave details of where her body is located. Felicia had been missing since July 2, 2007, after making a visit to Kim and David Cox's home. Her remains were found where he said they'd be in Pontotoc County on his family's former property. He had been a person of interest in Felicia's disappearance, but authorities had no evidence at the time. Kim's father and stepmother raised Lindsay and her 2 younger brothers after Kim's death, and one of his sons still has fear that he will come after them, even knowing that he is no longer breathing the air that he didn't deserve. Anna Mariah Wilson was born on May 18, 1996 in Littleton, New Hampshire, to Eric and Karen Wilson. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont, and went by Mo and was a gifted multi-sport athlete. She was the captain of her high school soccer team and was a nationally ranked junior skier, placing 3rd in the 2013 U.S. Junior National Championship downhill event. After college, she transitioned from skiing to biking, and at the age of 25, she was a professional bike racer and worked as a demand planner for Specialized. She enjoyed cooking, riding, and traveling, especially to Italy. She recently excelled at gravel racing, a relatively new category of cycling that some consider a hybrid of road cycling and mountain biking. On May 10, 2022, a profile in Bello News referred to her as the winningest woman in the American off-road scene. The next day, May 11, 2022, was preparing to compete in the 157-mile gravel low-coast bike race in Texas. She was staying with a friend in Austin, Texas, while preparing for the upcoming race in Hico. She told her friend she was going for an afternoon swim, but she didn't go along. Cyclist Colin Strickland joined her and the two would have dinner together afterwards. Colin would then drop Mo back at her friend's house. That's where the story takes a horrible turn. Colin's girlfriend, 35-year-old Caitlin Marie Armstrong, was apparently jealous of Mo and Colin's relationship. Armstrong had even confronted Mo before and told her to stay away from Colin. After Colin dropped Mo off, Armstrong would allegedly shoot Mo to death inside of her friend's home. Armstrong had been suspicious of Colin cheating on her with Mo for several months. However, Colin told police that he and Mo were only briefly romantically involved in the fall of 2021, but only while he and Armstrong were temporarily broken up. He said after that, Mo and him remained friends and their relationship became completely platonic and professional. Her loved one said, had no reason to believe that she was romantically involved with anyone when she was killed. 6 days after the murder, police issued a homicide warrant for Armstrong. Following Mo's killing, police located 2 handguns in the home Colin shared with Armstrong, which matched the spent shell casing found at the murder scene. Armstrong's car was also seen on surveillance camera near the crime scene prior to the shooting. Somehow, Armstrong was able to obtain a fraudulent passport and would use this to flee the country. She would fly from Texas to New York and then fly from the New York International Airport to Costa Rica. She was on the run for 43 days until she was found and arrested on June 29, 2022 at a hostel on Santa Teresa Beach in Costa Rica. Investigators discovered that before she fled Austin, Texas, she sold her Jeep Grand Cherokee to a CarMax dealership. Also, while Armstrong was on the run, she cut her hair and dyed it dark brown and wore a bandage on her nose, claiming she had a surfboarding accident. Colin states that he has a lot of regret and torture knowing that this horrible crime was so close to him. As of June 30, 2022, she is being detained in Costa Rica on an immigration violation until she is deported back to Texas to face murder charges and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Michelle Koski was born in 1973 and was said to love animals and enjoyed playing Super Mario Bros. At the age of 17, she was still in high school and living in Seattle, Lake Washington in the 13,300 block of 30th Avenue Northeast, with her 28-year-old boyfriend. She had plans to attend college the next fall and was working at Taco Bell. On August 18, 1990, she called her mother Violet Simonson and agreed to come back home and stay at her and her stepfather's house to take care of the dog while her mother and stepfather went on a trip out of town. Before going to her parents' house, she visited an apartment earlier in the day in the 6200 block of 14th Avenue, Northwest Seattle, and then was given a ride back to her apartment. At some point, though, she was given a ride to an area in Snohomish County where teens were known to hang out, drink, and ride motorcycles. While there, things would take a terrible turn and she would end up missing. A week later, on August 25, 1990, a woman walking her dog near Echo Lake Road and Highway 522 stumbled upon a female's lifeless body. The finding was in Snohomish, Washington, not far from where Michelle went missing. It was determined that the body belonged to Michelle and she had tragically been sexually assaulted and murdered. Investigators said that whoever committed the crime used pieces of concrete from a nearby pile to finish her off. Her live-in boyfriend was initially a person of interest but would ultimately be ruled out as a suspect. Around the time Michelle's body was found, the Green River Killer had been terrorizing the Seattle area for about a decade, and Seattle investigators considered a serial killer to be a possibility. But sadly, with no concrete evidence pointing at anyone, the case would go cold for the next 3 decades. In 2005, a cold case team reopened her case, and over the next 10 years, they would comb through several possible suspects, but they were all ruled out by DNA comparison. In 2012, the detective on the case stated that what likely happened was the person probably intended to have sex with her, but she didn't want to, and when she tried to flee, he ran her down and strangled her. In 2021, Parban Nanolabs would take the DNA sample, but their process would be extended because they had to deconvolute the DNA sample because it contained the DNA from both the suspect and victim, which makes it a tedious and challenging process. Then, genetic genealogist Deb Stone spent about 9 more months building a family tree and entering her findings into public genealogy websites, including Family Tree DNA and GeneMatch. From her home in Oregon, she then found 2 likely suspects, which were 2 brothers, and these names were provided to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office to finish the investigation to determine which one was the likely killer. State and county crime labs compared the crime scene samples to one of the brothers, revealing they were the same person and the DNA was a match. 32 years after her murder, on June 30, 2022, the sheriff's office announced they had identified the killer as Robert Anthony Brooks. Authorities say Brooks was 23 at the time and had been released from prison 4 months before the murder and was living with a relative only a few blocks from Michelle. Authorities did not say for what he was previously convicted of, but it was reportedly a juvenile conviction. During his life, he was never on detectives' radar in her case, and it's unclear how and when she crossed paths with Brooks. But this waste of space wouldn't face justice for Michelle's senseless murder because he died of natural causes at the age of 48 in King County, Washington in 2016. Michelle's mother told TV news crews she was grateful there would be no trial and said other families waiting for answers should take this case to heart and wait for the technology as it's getting better every day, and pretty soon none of those bad guys will be able to hide. In August 2019, employees of McKnight Tire in Columbia, Missouri found a small backpack hidden inside of a tire along the tree line at the edge of the store's parking lot. Upon checking it, they made a gruesome discovery. In the backpack was the decomposing remains of a full-term female infant, which was mostly bones. Due to the state of decomposition, the initial autopsy was unable to determine the cause of death or how long the child may have been there. The Columbia Police Department investigated many leads over the next few years, but were unable to determine what happened to the infant and who her parents were. In September of 2020, Columbia Police Department partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing to develop new leads that might help identify the infant. A DNA Solves crowdfund was established to cover the cost of testing for the case. Othram was able to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the infant. Meanwhile, on June 14, 2022, a letter that had been found years earlier in a wallet hidden behind a drawer at a local Super 8 hotel was released to authorities. When it was first discovered in 2019, the hotel employee didn't know the significance of the disturbing letter. It was then placed in a drawer in Lost and Found, where it remained until news of the discovery of the remains hit the news. It appeared to have been written by the mother of the infant and was intended for the police department. By calling the police and alerting them to the letter, the hotel employee really helped the case despite holding on to it for years. A genetic genealogist built a family tree based on the DNA and was able to give law enforcement a possible identification of the baby and her parents. On June 28, 2022, the Columbia Police Department announced that the baby had been identified as Simone J. Daniels. She was 4 to 5 months old when she died at the nearby hotel, and her remains had been inside the tire since 2017. Her parents were arrested the same day as the press conference released the baby's identity. The letter left at the hotel was the key to solving the mystery. 30-year-old Stefan Fountain of St. Joseph was charged with first-degree murder and abandonment of a corpse, and 28-year-old Lavisha Daniels of St. Louis was charged with abandonment of a corpse and first-degree endangering the welfare of a child. The letter allegedly written by Daniels states that she had completed her shift at People Ready, where she had been working on construction projects. She claims that after coming home, Fountain fed the baby before going to bed, and when Daniels woke up, she discovered her daughter in an odd posture with a towel around her neck and blood in her mouth. She claimed they both attempted CPR before she panicked and ran away while Fountain placed the baby in a backpack and left it at McKnight Tire. According to records, state identity cards were also discovered within the wallet that was left at the hotel. As a last note, Simone wasn't their only child. They actually have several other children together. On December 8, 1993, Valerie Brock found the lifeless body of a baby boy in her backyard in a rural area of Hugo, Oklahoma, and called authorities. The medical examiner would determine that the baby was born alive and then murdered. Now a homicide case, Choctaw County Sheriff's Office brought in OSBI agents to help. Agents conducted numerous interviews in the aftermath of the baby's death, including interviewing 25-year-old Myonia Michelle Allen, who was working for Brock and dating Brock's son. Despite the investigation, no suspects in the homicide were identified. The case went cold, but investigators retained samples of the boy's DNA for future use, and he became known as Baby Boy Hugo. Baby Boy Hugo's case captured the hearts of many in rural Oklahoma, with locals raising money to give him a proper burial. He was buried in January 1994 in Babyland, a section of Mount Olivet Cemetery reserved for infants who'd passed away. Fast forward to October 2020 when an OSBI agent teamed up with the Cold Case Unit and criminologist at the OSBI Forensic Science Center. They submitted DNA evidence to Parbon Nanolabs for testing, and by April 2021, they had results. Upon reviewing the results, the OSBI team pursued their leads right back to Myonia Michelle Allen. On June 15, 2022, an OSBI agent met with Allen at the Durant Police Department, and she agreed to submit DNA samples to determine if she was Baby Doe's biological mother. However, they wouldn't need the DNA results because about 20 minutes into the interview, she admitted the baby was hers and admitted to killing him after he was born and burying him in the backyard. At the time of Baby Doe's death, Allen worked at a daycare center and Valerie Brock was her boss, the woman that discovered the baby in her backyard and mother of Allen's boyfriend at the time. She allegedly said that she did not tell anyone about her pregnancy, the delivery, or the baby's alleged murder. The court document states that on December 7, 1993, Allen said she had spent the night at Brock's home along with her boyfriend, his son, and her daughter. During the early morning hours of December 8th, she had a physical altercation which caused her to go into labor unexpectedly at Brock's home and gave birth in a barn on the property. She said she carried the newborn to the house after his birth and laid him on a couch inside. She retrieved a weapon from the house and carried him behind the well house. Later that morning, Brock noticed what she thought was a doll in her backyard, but when she walked outside to retrieve the toy, she realized it was a newborn baby. Investigators had originally learned that Allen had spent the night at Brock's home, so they interviewed her on December 17th, 9 days after the homicide. She told detectives she had never seen a pregnant woman at the house. She initially claimed the baby had been stillborn, but a few days later in a follow-up interview, Allen was shown the baby's autopsy report, proving that this was not true. At that point, Allen allegedly confessed to ending his life with a knife. She said she had intended to have Baby Doe at the hospital and put it up for adoption after his birth. Allen was booked into the Choctaw County Detention Center and is being held without bond, and Baby Doe can now be properly laid to rest and his killer will now be held accountable. On July 9, 1997, Bailey Troy Gardner was born in Lenexa, Kansas, just outside Kansas City. At 27, he was living in Hendersonville, Tennessee, working as a technical program manager at Amazon. Friends and family said he had a heart of gold. He loved being on the water with his boat and was especially close to his dad, Troy. Late Friday night into early Saturday, June 29, 2024, at Cedar Creek Marina, on Old Hickory Lake in Mount Juliet, just outside Nashville, a horrible tragedy unfolded. Just after midnight, the marina's restaurant, the Scoreboard, had closed for the night. Around that same time, 3 masked suspects ambushed employees inside, pistol-whipped 2 of them, and forced them to open the safe. As they fled, Bailey pulled into the parking lot with his boat in tow. One suspect approached the driver's side of his truck and opened fire, shooting Bailey multiple times while he was still in the vehicle. The employees who were assaulted survived, but Bailey was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators worked quickly using Mount Juliet cameras. The tag came back to 41-year-old Adrian A. McLean of Nashville. 3 weeks after the shooting, on July 17, 2024, McLean was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and 3 counts of aggravated robbery. Authorities also noted he had overstayed his visa. 2 accomplices remain at large. 14 months later, in mid-September 2025, a Wilson County jury convicted McLean of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. Under Tennessee law, the conviction carries a mandatory life sentence. Formal sentencing is currently set for January 9, 2026. Investigators are still seeking the other suspects and are offering a $15,000 reward for information leading to their arrest. Caitlin Jordan Crocker was born May 18, 1999 in Columbia, South Carolina to Harold and Jonna Crocker. At 19, she was living in Winesboro, fun, a little stubborn in the best way, and dreaming big. She graduated Fairfield Central with honors in 2017, earned her cosmetology license, and landed a beauty expert job at the Ulta in Sand Hills. She wanted to do makeup for celebrities one day, but would sadly never get the chance. As for her love life, she was in an on-again, off-again relationship with Alexander Harmon and sometimes stayed at his place in Camden. That's where she was the night of June 2, 2018. Deputies were sent to Harmon's home on Cleveland School Road after his father, calling from New York, told 911 that his son said he'd shot Caitlin and planned to take his own life. When officers arrived, they found Caitlin inside, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. They recovered a 12-gauge shotgun and a spent shell. On body cam, Harmon admitted the shooting and was arrested. Investigators have not publicly offered a specific motive. No robbery, no intruder, just a deadly act inside a troubled relationship. Harmon was booked in 2018 and initially released on a $150,000 surety bond. He missed a court date on November 17, 2023, and a warrant was issued. After more than a year on the run, U.S. Marshals arrested him in Iowa in January 2025, and he was extradited to Kershaw County. On September 19, 2025, the jury found Alexander Harmon guilty of Caitlin's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. It was a dark, snowy night on February 3, 1972, when the Durhams, a well-respected family in North Carolina, were brutally murdered in their own home. The case remained unsolved for over 5 decades, causing fear and unease in the community as people wondered who could have committed such a heinous crime. There are some mysteries in this world that seem to be shrouded in darkness, their secrets hidden away from prying eyes and curious minds. Finally, investigators were able to solve the triple homicide after more than 50 years in 2022. Could this case have been linked to organized crime? How were police able to solve this case? Today's case takes us to the beautiful city of Boone, North Carolina, which is a picturesque mountain town located in the northwest region of the state. Nestled in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, it is a popular destination for outdoor enthusiasts and nature lovers. Boone is home to the Appalachian State University, which brings a youthful energy to the town. Visitors can explore the charming downtown area, which is filled with unique shops, restaurants, and galleries. Outdoor activities abound in the area with opportunities for hiking, biking, skiing, and more. Boone's natural beauty, rich history, and vibrant culture make it a mesmerizing destination in North Carolina. Bartex Bryce Durham, the son of Coy M. Durham and Collie Devon Crabb Durham, was born on November 12, 1926, in the beautiful state of North Carolina. He was a man of many talents and experiences who lived a meaningful life. Bryce's siblings Ralph L. Durham and Gail Durham Manlin were an important part of his life while growing up. He graduated from Appalachian State University with a degree in history and physical education in 1941, and went on to teach for a year at Mount Pleasant School in Wilkes County after World War II. But his career path took a different turn, and for 6 years before settling in Boone, Durham operated the Mount Airy Auto Loan and Sales Finance Company. Before that, he was a part of the Home Finance Company for 13 years, gaining valuable expertise in finance and business. Despite his varied professional background, Bruce Durham remained a loyal member of the Boone community until his tragic and untimely death in 1972. Virginia, born on October 24, 1927, was the daughter of Calvin M. Church and Virginia Lucenia Eller Church. She was one of 5 siblings, and the other 4 were Winnie Levon Church Elliott, Dashia Church, Dovey Pierce Church Baker, and Rena Mosio Bumgardner Walsh, who were all integral parts of her life as she grew up. In 1951, Bryce and Virginia got married, and later that year Virginia gave birth to a baby girl, and they named their daughter Ginny Sue Durham. On May 2, 1953, they were blessed with a son and gave him the name Bobby Joe Durham. They were a loving and tight-knit family. Ginny Sue was later married to the love of her life, Troy Hall. Nestled in the mountainous terrain of Boone, North Carolina, the Durham family had found their heaven. After moving from Wilkes to Mount Airy, the family of 3 decided to start afresh and settled in Boone in 1969. Their residence, 187 Clyde Townsend Road, was perched atop a steep driveway just off the 105 bypass. Ginny Sue Hall lived a mere 4 miles away with her husband. It was the perfect place for the Durhams, a sanctuary from the hustle and bustle of life. On the winter evening of February 3, 1972, in the sleepy town of Boone, North Carolina, the weather was unrelenting. The frigid air whipped through the trees, sending snowflakes swirling in a chaotic dance. The Durham family hunkered down in their home on Clyde Townsend Road, seeking refuge from the biting cold. Bruce Durham, the owner of a Buick dealership, and his wife Virginia, who was a librarian, had relocated to Boone from Mount Airy just a year prior. Their son Bobby was a freshman at Appalachian State University. The family was known for their hard work, their reserved nature, and their preference for solitude. However, as the wind howled outside, something sinister was brewing inside. A tragedy was about to unfold that would shake Boone to its core. Unbeknownst to the Durham family, their lives were about to change forever. On a snowy night on February 3, 1972, Bryce and Virginia Durham were at home with their son Bobby when a horrific tragedy struck them. The Hall family sat cozily in their split-level home, at peace and content. But their peace was soon shattered by a phone call that sent shivers down their spines. Virginia Durham's panicked voice on the other end of the line conveyed the urgency of the situation. Her voice trembling as she whispered to her son-in-law, Justin Troy Hall, about several intruders who had broken into her home. But before anyone could make sense of the call ended abruptly, leaving Hall wondering if it was just a cruel prank. Despite Hall's doubts about the validity of the call, his wife Ginny was overcome with worry for her family's safety. They hurriedly made their way to the car, which stubbornly refused to start. As the road up to the Durham's house was treacherous, they couldn't make it on foot. Luckily, a neighbor and private detective, Cecil Small, agreed to drive them up there. Ginny remained in the car as Hall and their neighbor Cecil went inside. What they found inside the house was a scene of chaos. The house had been ransacked and the sound of running water filled the air. But as they made their way to the ground floor bathroom, the true horror of the situation was revealed. There in the cramped space lay the lifeless and fully clothed bodies of Bryce, Bobby, and Virginia Durham in the bathtub, their heads submerged and the water still running. The phone line had been ripped from the wall, leaving the house eerily silent. With no other options left, Hall called the authorities at around 11 p.m. from the neighbor's apartment to investigate the gruesome scene before them. In a matter of minutes, a flurry of law enforcement officers arrived, their flashing lights piercing through the dark of this snowy night. As investigators stepped into the Durham home, their eyes scanned the once tidy interior that now looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Drawers were pulled out, clothing was strewn across the floor, and pictures hung at odd angles or lay shattered on the ground. Closets had been ransacked and the furniture was knocked over as if the perpetrators had been searching for something in a frenzied state. The officers' eyes then fell on the torn sofa set where the Durhams had been peacefully enjoying a late-night snack in their favorite TV show. The sight of the chaos and violence left a heavy feeling in the pit of their stomachs as they knew they were in for a long and grueling investigation. The television still flickered, with 3 half-filled glasses and plates of partially eaten food left abandoned on a coffee table. Further, they noticed something peculiar on the kitchen table, a half-eaten baked chicken, which indicated that the crime happened while the Durhams were enjoying their meal together. At first, it appeared to be a simple robbery gone wrong, but the presence of untouched valuables raised suspicions. A money bag bulging with cash sat undisturbed, a testament to the fact that robbery was not the motive behind the heinous crime. The agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation knew they had to act fast. They carefully transported the bodies to Chapel Hill for an autopsy. The results were grim, but not surprising. Dr. Paige Hudson, the state medical examiner, confirmed the cause of the Durham's family death. Virginia died of strangulation, while the 2 men had been strangled and drowned. As the investigation into the Durham family murders began, agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation descended upon the Durham residence, determined to uncover the truth behind the brutal murders. With precision and determination, they combed through every inch of the house, carefully cataloging every clue and piece of evidence they found. As the investigation deepened, the team grew, swelling to 7 or 8 agents by Saturday morning. But that was only the beginning. To unlock the secrets of the crime, they called upon the expertise of 2 top physicists from the State Crime Laboratory, who arrived in Boone late Saturday night to join the hunt for answers. For hours, they pored over the evidence, piecing together the clues and working tirelessly to unravel the mystery of the Durham murders. As the investigation proceeded, witnesses came forward with vital information. One eyewitness reported seeing a green and white SUV leaving the Durham's residence just after 10:30 p.m. that fateful night, but the vehicle disappeared in seconds. The North Carolina Highway Patrol launched a search for the SUV and found it abandoned on the side of the road a few miles away. The engine was still running, windshield wipers slapping against the snow, and doors firmly closed. The investigators realized that the killers had used the SUV as their escape car. It was later discovered that Bryce Durham had taken the SUV from his dealership to get home in treacherous weather conditions. As the police searched the car, they found a bag of silver presumably taken from the Durham residence. It was a pivotal clue, and investigators hoped it would lead them to the perpetrators of this heinous crime. The investigation into the Durham murders was a tough journey through the murky waters of suspicion and speculation. The list of possible suspects was long and winding, with multiple twists and turns along the way. Justin Troy Hall, the estranged son-in-law of Bryce and Virginia Durham, was among those scrutinized by authorities. A group of men from Asheville also came under the microscope, arrested and charged in connection with the killings, only to be set free due to a lack of evidence. Rumors and whispers of a contract killing hung heavy in the air, fueled by the precision of the knots used to bind the victims. But as the years rolled by, leads became cold. The Watauga County Sheriff's Department, Boone Police Department, and North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation all toiled tirelessly, yet the trail grew colder with each passing day. It seemed as though the answers to this brutal crime would forever remain a mystery. For over 45 years, the Durham triple murder case remained an unsolved mystery, with leads drying up and investigators struggling to piece together the clues. But in 2019, a glimmer of hope emerged after a conversation between a man named Shane Burt and a sheriff's deputy in Georgia. Shane Burt was the son of a suspected killer, Billy Sunday Burt, who died in prison in 2017 while serving a life sentence for 3 murders that he committed in the 1970s. Shane Burt was helping with research for an upcoming book by Phil Hudgens when he shared a shocking story his father had once told him during a prison visit. A story of murder and mayhem that took place in the snowy mountains of North Carolina. According to Burt, his father had admitted to killing 3 people during a heavy snowstorm and had narrowly avoided capture. The news sent shockwaves through the White County Sheriff's Office, which immediately reached out to their counterparts in the Watauga County Sheriff's Office to share the information. This conversation led to a renewed investigation into the Durham murders case and brought new hope for justice for the victims and their families. The wheels of justice never stopped turning, and in the case of the Durham murders, they turned slowly but towards the truth. With new leads to follow, investigators wasted no time in tracking down Billy Wayne Davis, a known associate of Billy Burt, who was already serving a life sentence in Georgia for his previous crimes. The Sheriff's Department conducted 3 separate sessions in September 2019, October 2020, and August 2021, spanning 2 years, each one with a crucial piece of the puzzle in determining who was responsible for the heinous crimes. It was the corroboration of evidence from these interviews, as well as from 2 other sources, that finally led to the revelation of the truth. Through meticulous evidence gathering and careful cross-referencing, the investigators were able to piece together a shocking connection to a case from across state lines. The Fleming case of 1973 involved a network known as the Dixie Mafia, a loosely organized network of criminals that had terrorized the Southeast with their violent crimes in the 60s and 70s. This case had similar circumstances to the Durham murders, and names began to surface that linked the 2 together. According to officials, Billy Wayne Davis, who is 81 years old and a resident of a correctional facility in Augusta, Georgia, is the only surviving member of the notorious Dixie Mafia. He is currently serving a life sentence for murder at the Augusta State Medical Prison in Georgia and has been in prison since 1986. According to investigators, he revealed details about a hired hit in the North Carolina mountains that went awry during a heavy snowstorm. Davis admitted to acting as the group's getaway driver during the Durham family murders, claiming that it was the other three men, Billy Sunday Burt, Bobby Jean Gaddis, and Charles David Reed, who entered the house that fateful night. Davis refused to reveal any other information about them. Despite the breakthrough in the Durham family murder case in 2022, justice may never be fully served. With 3 of the 4 suspects already deceased, charges are not expected to be filed for the killings. The 4th suspect, 81-year-old Billy Wayne Davis, is currently serving a life sentence in a Georgia prison, and he is not expected to see freedom anytime soon. The idea of justice being served may be nothing more than a mere fantasy for the victims' families, who have waited for 5 long decades for answers. The tragedy of this cold case is compounded by the fact that the identities of those who ordered the hit remain unknown. For the surviving family members, the lingering question of why their loved ones were targeted may haunt them forever. Special Agent in charge for the Northwestern District, North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation Chris Laws praised the diligent work of all the professionals and community members who have contributed their efforts to the case over the years. Ginny Durham, the sole surviving member of the Durham family, was full of gratitude as she expressed her appreciation in the press conference that was held in 2022 to the dedicated individuals who worked tirelessly to solve her family's 50-year-old cold case. She acknowledged the sacrifices made by these investigators, who spent countless days and weekends to solve the case. Ginny Durham was especially grateful to Len Hagman, the sheriff of Watauga County, who remained committed to bringing closure to her family. She also expressed her gratitude to Wade Colford, a special agent with the State Bureau of Investigation, Carolyn Johnson, captain of investigations for Watauga County Sheriff's Office, and Charles Whitman, a retired SBI special agent who continued to work on the case even after retirement. For Ginny Durham, their unwavering dedication and friendship meant the world to her, and it gave her hope in the midst of difficult years. It's a testament to the human spirit's power to persevere, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Watauga County Sheriff Len Hagman also extended his thanks to all the agencies, law enforcement officials, investigators, and agents who had worked on the case for decades. The resolution of the Durham case was a much-needed turning point for the community affected by the tragic events of 1972. The Watauga County Sheriff's Office acknowledged the numerous individuals who have played a role in bringing the case to a close, and expressed their appreciation for the efforts of everyone who helped find answers for the Durham family. For Rufus Edmonston, former North Carolina Attorney General, it became a personal preoccupation. He met with Bryce Durham's mother, who had begged him to find the killers, and it broke his heart to see her die without finding closure. "I didn't want to let her down," he said. "It was the mystery of the mountains for years and years, and Edmonston was frustrated he couldn't solve it himself. But now, thanks to the tireless work of Sheriff Hagamond and his team, the case has been solved." For Edmonston, it was a great relief, and he expressed his gratitude to the investigators who made it happen. The son of one of the perpetrators, Shane Burt, wants to apologize to every single victim of his father, Billy Sunday Burt. Despite his father being a murderous man who killed dozens of people, Shane is not trying to cover up his heinous acts. Instead, he wants to provide closure to as many people as he can. The case may have taken 50 years to be solved, but everyone involved showed dedication and commitment to justice, which is a testament to their perseverance. Despite the lack of closure, the fact that the case has been solved after 50 years brings some measure of relief, and the hope that future generations will be able to rest easy knowing that justice has prevailed, even if only partially. We hope that you've enjoyed this gripping story of how this cold case was solved after 50 years. The Durham family can finally find peace and closure after over 4 decades of waiting. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of law enforcement officials, investigators, and community members, justice has been served. The persistence and commitment of those involved in this case remind us that it is never too late to seek the truth and find answers. Natesha Lou Lattimore was born on November 8, 1991. At 29, she lived in Walnut Hills, Cincinnati, Ohio with her 3-year-old son, Nilo. If she went somewhere, he went too. She worked as a nursing assistant and spent the rest of her time with Nilo. On December 5, 2020, her ex-boyfriend, 25-year-old Deshaun Brown, was in Natesha's apartment when the unimaginable happened. What set him off may never be known, but what followed is. Brown attacked Natesha, inflicting fatal injuries. He didn't move her right away. He kept her body in the apartment for days, searched how to clean up the scene, and attempted to scrub away all the evidence. Before sunrise the next morning, December 6th, Brown put Nilo in his stroller and walked to the Purple People Bridge, the pedestrian span between Cincinnati and Newport, Kentucky. He then did the unthinkable, and Nilo died in the freezing Ohio River. Massive searches followed, but his body was never recovered. 5 days later, on December 11th, Brown bought a body bag online, called an Uber, and returned to the same bridge with Natesha's remains. He tried to throw the bag over the side, but it snagged on a ledge. The next day, a security guard spotted the bag, realized what it was, and called 911. That's how police found Natesha. Brown lied to the Uber driver about what was in the bag, and he used Natesha's phone to post as her after she was dead. Attempts to buy time. Investigators used bridge surveillance and digital breadcrumbs, Uber trip records among them, and quickly identified Brown. Near the river, they also recovered a stroller and a Paw Patrol blanket bearing Nilo's blood. After Brown's arrest, the court process stretched on. In June 2022, during a hearing, Nilo's father, Tonio Hughes, rushed the table and struck Brown. Grief in public view. Nearly 5 years later, on September 10, 2025, Brown pleaded guilty to 2 counts of aggravated murder. In exchange, prosecutors took death off the table, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As for motive, a witness told authorities, Brown blamed Natesha for a miscarriage and had talked about killing her and Nilo in retaliation. In 2021, tragedy struck the family again when 7-year-old Charisse Lattimore, a cousin of Nilo, was killed after being struck by a car in Avondale. The family will carry these losses forever, but Brown will spend the rest of his life in prison. Cheryl Ferguson was born on July 27, 1958, in Long Beach, California. Friends and family describe a big-hearted woman who was fiercely devoted to her son, Philip. At 65, she lived in Anaheim Hills with her husband, former Orange County Judge, Jeffrey Ferguson. Things in the marriage were rocky, to say the least, and Jeffrey had a known drinking problem. Money was always a flashpoint for their arguments, and alcohol only fueled the situation. On August 3, 2023, Jeffrey sat on the bench in court as usual, drinking during the lunch hour and continuing upon arriving home. He and Cheryl ended up at a restaurant that evening where an argument broke out, and as was typical for Jeffrey, in moments of frustration, he made a gun-like gesture toward her. Gestures that Cheryl had relayed to her family. Upon arriving home, the argument continued. Not long after, 911 received a call from Jeffrey saying he'd accidentally shot his wife. Officers arrived to find Cheryl with a single fatal wound. When questioned by police, he stuck to his story that the shooting was an accident. The only problem was he sent a text to court staff that read, "I just lost it. I just shot my wife. I won't be in tomorrow. I will be in custody. I'm so sorry." That text would be the focal point of a case built on his own words, not just for what happened, but why. So what did Jeffrey say really happened? According to him, he was removing his gun from his ankle holster to set it on a cluttered coffee table when he fumbled it because of a shoulder injury and it accidentally discharged. However, investigators weren't buying it. They believed that Jeffrey had shot Cheryl in an angry and intoxicated state. Prosecutors agreed, and he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. A subsequent search of the home turned up 47 firearms, including the Glock, and more than 26,000 rounds of ammo. During the first trial in March of 2025, one juror felt the evidence wasn't quite enough, leading to an 11-1 deadlock jury. Prosecutors wasted no time in retrying him the very next month. During the second trial, they emphasized his alcohol use, the gun gesture at the restaurant, his firearms training, plus the fact that Glocks are equipped with a safe action system. The system includes a trigger safety lever on the trigger itself, a firing pin safety to block the striker from moving, and a drop safety that ensures the firing pin can only move when the trigger is intentionally pulled. This ensures the pistol only fires when the trigger is deliberately and fully pressed. There was also the very incriminating text message he had sent to his court staff, which led with, "Just lost it." That doesn't sound like an accidental shooting. And the second jury agreed and found him guilty of second-degree murder. To avoid conflicts in Orange County, sentencing was moved to the Los Angeles Superior Court. As the terms of his sentence were read, Jeffrey broke down. Cheryl's brother, Larry Rosen, and Jeffrey's son, Kevin, asked the court for leniency. Both said they believed the shooting was accidental. Larry specifically said that he originally thought Jeffrey had murdered his sister, but felt the evidence during the first trial showed it was a tragic accident. Another brother, Jeff Rosen, said he now regretted ever repeating Cheryl's frustration about Jeffrey's gun gesture during arguments. Philip described parents who argued and loved, and he stood firm that his mother's death was accidental. The judge weighed those pleas but called the case against Jeffrey absolutely overwhelming, citing his post-shooting text to court staff and hours of recorded statements in custody. Those statements included him saying that everyone would hate him, and he even pleaded for a jury to, and I quote, "convict my ass." After being convicted, Jeffrey told the court he loved his wife and understood the verdict, but insisted it was a horrific accident. He asked to remain in Orange County Jail during the appeal, prompting the judge to rebuke him again for believing rules didn't apply. However, when all was said and done, 23 jurors across both trials voted guilty. Only one favored involuntary manslaughter. Cheryl's life ended in the home she shared with her husband. Those who loved her speak of generosity and devotion, especially to Philip. That part of her story doesn't waver even as everything else has. Crystal Faye Todd was born on January 4, 1974 in Conway, South Carolina to parents Junior and Bonnie Todd. At the age of 17, she was a senior at a Conway, South Carolina high school, and as an early graduation gift, her mother Bonnie Faye Todd had given her a brand new 1991 Toyota Celica. On November 17, 1991, Crystal stopped in for her grandmother's birthday celebration and left about 7 p.m. kissing her mother goodbye and saying she was headed to the mall to meet her friends. Around 9 p.m. Crystal and a friend decided to go to a party in the Punch Bowl community where they stayed until 11 p.m. After dropping her friend off at home, Crystal rushed back to the mall to say goodbye to friends before her midnight curfew. But she never arrived home that night, and when midnight came and went, her mother became very concerned. At 3 a.m., Bonnie phoned police and a dispatcher took her description along with the description of her car. He tried to reassure her it wasn't unusual for teens to show up late and that Bonnie should just let him know when her daughter got home. At 8 a.m., Bonnie was panicking and called 911. Next, she contacted her daughter's longtime close friend, Ken Register, who said that he hadn't seen Crystal all night and that he would check the local hospitals. Two of Crystal's friends had found her car parked at the Conway Middle School. An officer was dispatched to the location and found the car locked with Crystal's purse still inside. The officer tried to reassure her that Crystal was likely still out with friends and having too much fun to call or come home. But Bonnie knew that wasn't like Crystal, and she said she knew her daughter wasn't coming home. The next day, on November 18, 1991, two men were driving just outside of Conway in the Maple community when one of them noticed something odd lying in the ditch along the road. Getting out for a closer inspection, the men realized it was a female body. The scene was gruesome and she was found to have been sexually assaulted. Her mother, a widow, was inconsolable. She told police that she was certain that Crystal's killer was someone she knew. Investigators believed the same thing, especially when they learned that she would have never gotten into a vehicle with someone she didn't know. Criminal profilers predicted that the killer would be an angry young white male who was confident the law wouldn't catch him, and he was probably a friend of the victim. Police asked 51 of Crystal's male friends and acquaintances if they would give DNA samples, and they all agreed. Crystal's friends, including longtime friend Ken Register, were there for Bonnie through the entire ordeal. Ken and Crystal had grown up together and remained close friends. And even Bonnie had always been fond of him. He was a shoulder for Bonnie to cry on and someone to rant to. However, before she was murdered, the friendship between Crystal and Ken had taken a turn for the worse. Crystal had confided in Bonnie that Ken had propositioned her for sex, despite the fact that he had a girlfriend and she had been appalled by this. The two had dated briefly in their early teens, but then decided to return to being close friends again. There had also been serious warning signs about Ken in the previous years. When he was 15, he made an obscene phone call to a grown woman and described in sickening detail how he wanted to mutilate and kill her. When it was his turn to be interviewed by police, he hesitantly but willingly provided his DNA, but the lab was backlogged, and it would be a couple months before they got to all the DNA samples collected from the citizens. Then, on February 15, 1992, the lab notified the police that they had a DNA match. Ken Register eventually broke down and confessed to the crime. He told investigators a story that is very likely untrue. He told them on the night Crystal died, they had unprotected consensual sex. Ken said when he didn't use protection, Crystal became furious and threatened to cry rape if she became pregnant. Said he became outraged at Crystal's screaming and insults, and before he realized what he was doing, he was stabbing her. Ken told investigators when he came to his senses and realized what he'd done, he panicked. He pulled Crystal from his car, tossed her into the ditch, threw away the knife and hurried home. Crystal's car keys and other evidence was found located at the Register home. Bonnie was shocked that she had been duped by Ken, who even served as a pallbearer at her daughter's funeral. After Register's arrest, it was discovered he had been arrested in September 1991 for exposing himself to a couple of teenage girls after asking them for directions. The charges were still pending when he was arrested for Crystal's murder. In September 1992, Register was tried on the indecent exposure charges and quickly found guilty. Then in early 1993, jurors found him guilty for Crystal's death, his sexual misconduct, kidnapping, and torture. Ken Register was sentenced to life in prison and remains incarcerated at the Broad River Prison in Columbia, South Carolina. There are reportedly many friends and family members of Crystal's who continue to write to and attend parole hearings. Anytime he is eligible. Despite being sentenced to 2 life sentences, he was eligible for parole in February 2022, but he waived his right to face the parole board. Nearly 2,700 people signed a petition asking that his parole not be granted. He will be eligible to face the parole board again in 2024. Her mother Bonnie passed away in 2014 and is buried next to her daughter in Conway. Tim Smith was the kind of fella folks counted on. Masters in social work, ran an assisted living community in Ocala, always showed up for his people. 8 years married to Herbert Swilly, who went by Herb, living in the Citrus Park neighborhood with Herb's daughter, Jordan. Weekends, you might catch Tim and Herb easing down the road on a 3-wheeler, wind in their faces and not a care in the world. But come Saturday, March 25, 2023, about 10:45, deputies rolled out for a welfare check. Tim had missed work, which just wasn't like him. They used a landlord's key, stepped inside a little apartment tied to Tim, and the room told a story no one wanted to hear. Injuries to his face and neck, a tight mark at the throat, and that sharp, bleachy smell hanging in the air. Trouble had come calling. Thursday, the 23rd, Tim left work around 4. After that, it's all timestamps and tail lights. Prosecutors said the violence didn't begin in that apartment at all. It started back at the house Tim shared with Herb. Said Tim had an extreme dose of diphenhydramine, Benadryl's sleepy cousin, more than 30 times the usual dentaligature around his neck. Later, they said his body was moved to that small meetup apartment and staged like a fling gone wrong. Now the defense tried to plant doubt. That apartment saw traffic, dating apps, visitors, mixed DNA. Maybe detectives got tunnel vision, but there was a thread to pull. In the deep hours of March 24th, a white pickup, Herb's, caught on camera headed toward the apartment, then back home. Tim's Jeep shows up there and stays. A figure walks away into the dark. Next morning, deputies enter, find Tim on the floor, Body cam captures the moment they tell Herb his husband is dead. He doesn't ask how, just starts in on where he'd been. Earlier that same day, Herb had called the sheriff, couldn't reach Tim, said 2 nights before they watched TV, went to bed. He left early for the gym, came home to an empty house, figured Tim went on to work. Investigators later said parts of that tale were false or self-serving. And when they pressed, Herb's lawyer wanted immunity before he'd say another word. Then came more. The couple's Ring camera system accessed the key footage, deleted according to the state. Jordan testified she heard noises that night and helped throw things away at her father's direction. Something she regrets, and that he told her to say he'd been home all night. Neighbors near the house remembered late night shouting around March 23rd, 24th and cars coming and going. Traffic that stopped cold after the homicide. Friends from AA and Tim's work circle said Herb was bullying about money and about Tim looking at a job out of country with a Zoom interview set for 9 a.m. on the 24th. He never made it. A recruiter said Tim was enthusiastic. Brookdale co-workers described the scramble when he didn't show. The landlord said Tim alone held that lease. On the 25th, Herb asked for entry, said he lost his key. A shop owner and a close friend recalled Herb moving quick, donating Tim's things, cleaning the Jeep so police wouldn't have ammunition, talking insurance and paperwork sooner than felt right. A DNA analyst with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement explained most items showed Tim's DNA. A few mixed profiles fit with the apartment's known use. The defense leaned on that. The state answered with the digital map, Tim's phone and Herb's truck, leaving home together just before 2 a.m. No credible sign Tim arranged any late-night meet with someone else. And then the why, part heartbreak, part arithmetic. Tim was the primary earner, eyeing that new job and maybe a new start. If he left, the money went with him. If he died, prosecutors said, Herb stood to benefit retirement funds and a life insurance policy around $333,000. After a week of testimony, jurors had the full picture. The drug levels, the ligature, the bleach, the truck and the Jeep, deleted video, tossed drugs, the finances, the plan to move. On Friday, September 19, 2025, they returned a verdict. Herbert Swilly, guilty of premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Robert Hodges handed down life with 687 days time served, and somewhere in Alcala, the elders Tim championed were tended by someone else that weekend. Franz stepped out of a courthouse into the Florida sun, searching for words that fit a man who didn't miss work, didn't miss promises, and this time couldn't come. Not the ending he earned, but at least finally an answer. In 1986, Michelle Welch was 12 years old and lived in Tacoma, Washington. On March 26, 1986, a babysitter allowed Michelle and her 2 younger sisters to ride their bikes to the nearby Puget Park in Tacoma. When they arrived, they realized they left their lunches, so Michelle rode her bike back home and then returned with their lunches. When she returned, she chained her bike next to one of her sister's bikes, set the lunches on the table, and went looking for her siblings, who had gone to a nearby business to use the restroom because there wasn't any at the park. When Michelle's sisters returned to the park, they didn't see her, so they went and played near a cave under the bridge for another half an hour. When the sisters returned to the park, they found a brown paper bag with their lunches on the table, but still no Michelle. They called her name and started down a trail looking for her, before their babysitter summoned them back. It was then determined that Michelle was missing. A classmate later told detectives that he saw a man in the park that day under the Proctor Bridge who kept watching the girls. Police were called to the park and began searching with a tracking dog. That night before midnight, the dog found her body in a makeshift fire pit area in the gulch. She had been beaten and sexually assaulted and died from a cut to the neck. DNA was collected and preserved, but unfortunately, there were no matches in the Cody's database. Parents of children in Tacoma would no longer allow their kids to ride their bikes or venture out as they had always done. Her murder would go unsolved for the next 30 years. In 2018, Parabon Nanolabs uploaded the suspect's DNA to GEDmatch, a public genetic genealogy database which permits searches of this type. Genetic genealogists then began building an in-depth family tree, narrowing the suspect to one of 2 brothers, Gary Charles Hartman. Both brothers had lived in Tacoma, Washington, when Michelle was murdered. The pair was placed under police surveillance, and officers eventually followed Gary Hartman into a restaurant, where they obtained a napkin he had used and discarded. Lo and behold, the DNA matched the DNA from the crime scene. 70-year-old Gary Hartman was charged with her rape and murder and sentenced to more than 26 years in prison. At his sentencing, he told his own family that he was sorry. According to reports, Hartman was working as a community nurse specialist at Western State Hospital and had a clean criminal record. However, Michelle wasn't the only young girl murdered in Tacoma in 1986. Within months of her murder, 13-year-old Jennifer Bastian was also murdered. It was always believed that their killers were likely the same person, as their slayings were very similar and both had been innocently riding their bikes through the city parks. But in 2016, Paramount Nanolabs created a snapshot phenotype report to the task force, which showed that although both men were Caucasian, the suspect in Michelle's case had 9% Northern Native American admixture and Jennifer's killer did not, meaning they were not the same person. Jennifer's killer, 66-year-old Robert Washburn, was also caught using information provided to investigators by genetic genealogists. Just like Hartman, Washburn was caught after a paper napkin was collected that he had been using at a restaurant, allowing them to collect his DNA. The DNA from the napkin matched the DNA that was collected from the crime scene in 1986. These two innocent girls' murders prompted a new bill called Jennifer and Michelle's Law. Signed into law in 2019 by Governor Jay Inslee, the bill sought to expand law enforcement's DNA database and allows detectives to obtain DNA samples from deceased sex offenders. The morning of December 7, 1985 in Frenchville, Maine, Armand and Lorraine Pelletier's Siberian Husky was led outside to relieve himself in the freezing temperatures and returned ever so gently holding a deceased newborn baby. Shocked, the couple took the baby in and called police. It was discovered that a woman gave birth just 700 feet from the home. She then left the infant in the snow and below zero temperatures. Upon leaving, she left tie prints in the snow. Police told them the newborn baby may have lived up to 30 minutes in the 30 below temperatures. The couple was never able to have children of their own and said had the baby survived, they would have loved to adopt her. Nearly 37 years later, on June 13th, in Maine, state police detectives traveled to Lowell, Massachusetts to arrest the mother of baby Jane Doe. Using genetic genealogy, DNA, and many years of hard work, the suspect was finally identified. The mother was identified as 58-year-old Leanne Daigle, formerly Leanne Garrett of Lowell, Massachusetts. She was quickly charged with the infant's murder, but has pleaded not guilty. At the age of 21, Daigle reportedly drove to a gravel pit in Frenchfield and gave birth to a baby girl. She alleges that she had no clue that she was pregnant, and on the night of December 6, 1985, she was driving home from work when she had the sudden urge to urinate. She pulled to the side of the road and gave birth and believed the infant was stillborn and left, blocking out what had just occurred. A couple weeks later, she and her new boyfriend moved in together in New Hampshire, where he was offered a new job. They had met at a July 4th celebration 5 months before she gave birth. They later married in 1987 and had 2 daughters and was reportedly a good mom to her daughters. The same technique used to find Leanne was used to find the biological father of the baby. He is now in an assisted living facility in Florida and unable to speak or communicate. One of Leanne's daughters had an in-depth conversation with her mother after she was arrested. Daigle said she had blocked out the memory and didn't recall anything about it until the police showed up to her door telling her she was the mother of an infant found dead decades earlier. It was determined she likely became pregnant on her 21st birthday but does not remember what happened the night of her birthday and did not recognize the name of the baby's father. She stated she suspects that she was drugged and raped. Her new boyfriend, who would later become her husband, stated if he had known she was pregnant at the time they started dating, that he would have wanted her to keep the baby and have them raise it together. He said that if she knew about the pregnancy, she may have hid it out of fear that he would leave her. At first, detectives did not believe that Daigle could have given birth without help and suspected John Daigle, her then boyfriend of several months, had assisted her. John said he produced a college transcript showing that he was in Orano in early December finishing school, and a roommate from the time sent police an email backing up his alibi. This will definitely be a case to continue to watch. Yanira Cedias was born on March 3, 1992, and by the age of 30, she was a mother of 3 young children and described as vibrant and lively with a big smile. On March 4, 2022, Yanira was celebrating her 30th birthday at a local casino. After the celebration, her ex-boyfriend, Juan Gastelum, picked her up and took her back to his apartment. This was the last time she was ever seen alive. After going missing, Moses Lake police called Yanira's phone to see if someone would answer. A man believed to be her ex, Gastelum, answered the phone. This information led police to question Gastelum. Allegedly, after they arrived at his apartment, Gastelum murdered Yanira and then took photos of himself sexually assaulting her. He then left the apartment with her body. Her family, with help of volunteers and community members, started searching several locations for Yanira's remains. Over 2 months later, on May 12th, detectives received data from Gastelum's cell phone leading them to where he went after leaving the apartment that night, which was a remote area off Highway 12 just outside Wauhula Junction, Washington. When authorities arrived at the location, they found her body in a sleeping bag covered with tree limbs and leaves. At this time, the medical examiner has not released the details on how Yanira died. However, Moses Lake police say that they found a large hunting knife that Gastelum threw away at a gas station and cadaver dogs detected human blood on it. He was arrested days later in Oregon, but fought extradition for 2 months before finally being extradited back to Washington state. He was charged with second-degree murder and second-degree rape following disturbing photos found on his cell phone. Documents also say Gastelum admitted to being physically abusive to Yanira, as 2 physical domestic calls were referenced from October 2021 and January 2022. On October 4, 2021, Yanira even requested a police report to get a restraining order against Gastelum. Gastelum had pleaded not guilty to both charges, and his next court appearance is scheduled for July 5, 2022. Yanira's 3 young children now live with their grandmother, Yanira's mother, Anna, and they deeply miss their mommy. On January 4, 1996, a woman called 911 and reported that a black man had broken into her apartment located at 2205 North Broadway Street in Santa Ana, California, and was stabbing her boyfriend. When police arrived, they found 22-year-old Christopher Hervey with multiple stab wounds. Tragically, Christopher would later die from his injuries. His girlfriend, Jade Binning, who he shared the apartment with, would tell police that she woke up at 3 a.m. to find Christopher struggling with the intruder. She said she tried to help but was slashed in the hand. Investigators would also speak with the neighbors who told police they'd heard a loud argument inside the apartment before police arrived. Detectives for this case told reporters at the time that it seemed like it was an attempted burglary gone wrong and nobody was arrested. The case went cold until January 2020, when investigators received an anonymous letter implicating Jade Binning for the murder of Christopher Hervey. After reopening the case, investigators found forensic evidence linking her to the crime. So on May 3, 2022, 26 years after his death, Binning, now a mother of 3, was arrested by the Marshals Lone Star Fugitive Task Force near her home in Austin, Texas, and charged with his murder. Jody Loomis was born June 5, 1952, and at the age of 20, she was living in Bethel, Washington at 20 Winesap Road. On August 23, 1972, she was innocently riding her bicycle from her home to a stable on Strumey Road to visit and ride her horse, Saudi, which was several miles away. She was last seen alive riding north on North Road to 164th Street Southeast by a girl working at a fruit stand. That girl saw her crossing the Bethel Everett Highway and riding up the hill on what was then called Penny Creek Road at about 5 p.m. About 30 minutes later, a couple who was driving up a secluded dirt road to Penny Creek Road, which is now Mill Creek Road, found Jody's partially nude body. She was still alive, but had been tragically shot twice and sexually assaulted. They placed her into their sob sonnet and was sadly pronounced dead on arrival to the hospital. It was determined that she had likely been shot with a .22 caliber weapon. Also, the bridle of her horse was missing from the crime scene and her bicycle had been thrown down a steep embankment. Her murder would go unsolved for the next 46 years. In 2008, A state crime lab technician discovered a tiny semen stain on Jody's boot that had previously gone unnoticed. This DNA would be used years later to begin a new investigation using genetic genealogy performed by Parbon Nanolabs and genetic genealogist Deb Stone. After the genealogist identified the parents of a possible suspect based on the family tree, police began to follow him. They would acquire a DNA sample from a discarded coffee cup he tossed in the trash while at the Tula Lip Resort Casino. Washington State Patrol's crime lab confirmed that it positively matched the DNA profile from the crime scene and indeed belonged to 77-year-old Terrence Miller of Edmonds, Washington. In April 2019, Miller was arrested at his home by detectives with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and charged with her murder. Miller had a history of sex crimes dating back to the 1960s, including molesting young girls and indecent exposure. After he was let out on bond, he was found dead, presumably from suicide, while the jurors were deliberating. 3 hours after his death, a jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Jody's brother, John Loomis, said he would have at least liked to see Miller go to prison after getting away with it for 48 long years. At the age of 30, Sherry Renee Herrera was a mother of 4 children living in Tulare, California. On March 30, 1993, Sherry had been dropped off at a rest area between Tulare and Pixley, California, and had arranged to be picked up in 10 minutes. This would be the last time she was seen alive. Just a few days later, her body was found in the desert along the I-10 freeway in Riverside County, California. DNA was collected from her body in the crime scene, and she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Court records identify her as a non-prostitute and drug user who worked the highway rest area in Tulare, California. With no leads, her case would go cold for the next 3 decades. In late May of 2022, Texas Rangers arrested 67-year-old Douglas Thomas at his home in Waco, Texas, for the murder of Shinda Denise Hayes. Shinda had been found murdered in Titus County, Texas in April of 1992, and just like Sherry, Shinda was also a known prostitute. Thomas was connected by authorities to that murder by a DNA match to evidence obtained from the crime scene. Thomas had traveled extensively throughout the United States during his 40-plus years as a truck driver. Using genetic genealogy, a family tree was created which led them to recently retired Thomas likely being responsible for Sherry's death as well. Investigators traveled to Texas and interviewed Thomas about Sherry's homicide. His DNA was collected to verify that he was indeed the suspect they were looking for. Based on their investigation, he was charged with her rape and murder. Thomas remains in custody in Texas and will be prosecuted first for the 1992 murder of Shinda. The DA's office will then request extradition to California to face justice for the murder of Sherry. It is believed that Thomas is a serial killer with more victims during his decades working as a long-haul truck driver. John Eva Carice was born on February 18, 1958. By 43, she was an Indigenous mother of 3 from Kirkland Lake, Ontario. Warm, energetic, and a little stubborn in the best way. A blood clot on Christmas Eve 1991 stopped her heart. She survived, but the brain injury that followed wrecked her short-term memory. Families say she became childlike at times, repeating herself, losing track, needing someone close by. She still talked about becoming a welder. Mostly she just wanted to be with her kids. After she got sick, her husband tried to care for her. It was a lot. 2 young children, 4 and 2, and a partner who suddenly needed round-the-clock help. With guidance from their family doctor, the decision was made to place her at North Bay Psychiatric Hospital about 3 hours away, so she'd be safe and watched. Dawn moved in during the early 90s and stayed until 2001. Staff remembered her as witty and friendly and always planning to get back to her children. She even gave herself a nickname, the Running Bear. The hospital kept her own close observation, but she still slipped away. Between 1997 and 2001, she left 9 times. And every time they found her on the grounds or along Highway 11, sometimes facing the wrong direction, sometimes the right one, it was always about home. Thursday, August 9, 2001. Earlier that day, she'd been in the craft room. An exit door sat about 29 feet away. She was left alone, long enough to go. What rattled the family later was this. Her duffel bag and her native status card were also missing, even though personal items were supposed to be locked in a secure vault. Family and advocates have raised a serious concern. A staff member, later convicted in an unrelated homicide case, had access to the secure vault where Dawn's status card was kept. Dawn wouldn't have had access to that room, yet her card vanished the same day she did. Staff didn't call police until the next day. About 16 hours later, Dawn and those belongings were never found. Her case sits inside a larger troubling pattern. She was one of 6 patients who vanished from that hospital between 1966 and 2010. Former staff have described a place stretched thin, too many patients, not enough staff, and record-keeping that left gaps you could fall through. The hospital opened in 1952, closed in 2011, and the buildings were demolished in 2013. Answers didn't come down with the walls. People did try. North Bay Police interviewed staff, family, and friends. Alerts went out to other agencies and to the public. A couple of tips surfaced early, but nothing stuck. Police haven't declared foul play in Dawn's case, and they haven't ruled it out either. Maybe she got lost in the woods by the property. Maybe she caught a ride and something went wrong. Maybe she checked in somewhere under her own name and privacy rules kept anyone from connecting the dots. Her daughter Sandra kept digging. Through her own research, she learned a man, someone she considers a person of interest, visited her mom around 11 a.m. that morning. At the time, she was told he was still an inpatient. Later, she learned he was actually living in the community and could come and go. Among Dawn's things, Sandra says she found a photo album inscribed to her mother with his name and the nickname, the Prince. Felt personal. She's never shaken the belief that he might know something. Years later, staff who spoke with a private investigator shared a last sighting around 11:30 a.m., not 5 p.m., as listed in the original police report. A shift like that changes where you look and how soon you get there. Sandra has asked the lead detective to interview this person of interest. She says it still hasn't happened. There's been outside help too. Ellen White, a former private investigator, volunteers on cold cases and shares what she learns on her podcast, Whereabouts Unknown. Listeners have provided tips, and through those responses, she learned more about the missing duffel and the status card, both reportedly gone from the vault when Dawn left that last time. Meanwhile, the tools to search have improved. In 2018, a new DNA data bank in Canada began comparing missing person profiles with unidentified human remains. A match can happen in the background after submissions are made. Even amateur sleuths look through public profiles to suggest connections. In the first 3 years, 38 matches were made, giving families answers they'd waited on for years. Tips still trickle in. Potential sightings of Dawn have been reported across the country, far more than anything that surfaced in those first months. One video from Brussels, Ontario looked promising, ruled out after local police confirmed the woman was known to them and not Dawn. Another sighting in a Timmins coffee shop turned out to be a professional who proved her identity. False leads frustrate everyone, but they keep the conversation going. Some details never fade. Dawn was last seen in a long pink, short-sleeve dress with a white floral print, a button front, and a crisscross drawstring at the back. She wore reddish-brown closed-toe sandals and may have been carrying a duffel. When she ran before, she tended to head for Highway 11 toward Kirkland Lake. She also knew her children's guardians were planning a move to Sudbury, so that direction may have made sense, too. Either way, both roads felt like a path back to her kids. Dawn was a loving, vibrant, proud Indigenous woman from the Odanak First Nation. Her case is open, and her family believes it hasn't been treated with the seriousness it deserves.